Bueno, buenas tardes a todos. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. How many of you have heard of LAVCA? A show of hands. Some. Okay, so I'll start with a quick introduction. We're the Latin, Andres already gave it. We work with investors, venture capital and private equity investors across Latin America. We have a very privileged perspective in terms of the data that we look at. We collect the leading, we have the best source of data about these kinds of transactions in the region. I was a journalist before this, covering one deal and another for TechCrunch, and when I got to LAVCA and got to see how much data there is out there, I realized that I think a lot of the international perception of what's happening in Latin America has more to do with the lack of visibility than it does with the lack of activity. So, a few of the firms that are LAVCA members are here, so you can recognize names. I have like one of the coolest jobs ever. I get to talk with investors and publish news that's relevant to them. I'm going to walk you guys through some of the 2016 numbers for venture investments in Latin America. So that's local investors, international investors, anyone who's putting venture dollars to work anywhere from Mexico south. There's a caveat here I'd like to say, which is that I look at Latin America as one of the most undervalued, undercapitalized emerging markets on the planet, probably there with Africa. If you consider the incredible opportunity, Latin America is interesting not only because we're here, there's a lot of interesting contours to this landscape. And so while we're seeing the money slowly go up and we're seeing the local venture ecosystems develop, we see a much larger opportunity moving forward. So if you just look at the dollars, you can see from 2011 to 16, there were $500 million invested. Oh, I have a pointer here. This is my first time with a pointer. This is great. So that's the number invested. There was a little dip, as you can see, so 16% decrease in terms of the capital, but we're seeing the number of deals going up every year, which is important. Okay, so now we're going to look at, I'll give you guys a little space. We're going to look at the dollars invested in each of these countries. So regardless of where the money came from, where did the money go? This is probably not news to a lot of you, but 1 out of every $2 that gets invested, venture dollars, goes to Brazil. So they're over half of the amount invested. Mexico's next. Then Peru, Colombia, and Argentina each have about 1 out of 20 of those dollars. However, if you look at the number of deals that happened, last year was a very busy year for Mexico. We see a lot of new funds in Mexico and a lot of activity, and they are now, back again. Not very good with clickers. They're now the most, there's more deals happening in Mexico than anywhere else in the region. About 1/3 of the deals are in Mexico, about 1/3 are in Brazil, 1/3 are in the rest of the region. So we're going to dive in now. That was a look at geo. We're going to look at deals by sector. So if you take that $500 million, $342 million was invested in IT startups, information technology. This graph only looks at the money that was put into IT, so we're not looking at other categories of investment. Most of it's IT. And within IT, most of it's Fintech. So this chart's looking at the number of deals. About 1 in every 4 deals, venture deals that happened last year for IT investments, was a Fintech deal. E-commerce is number 2, and then you go around the wheel. But Fintech is a disproportionate amount of the money. So about half of all of the dollars that got invested into IT startups got invested in Fintech. So it's about 1 in 4 IT deals, 1 in 2 IT dollars. Yeah, it's interesting to see that despite the fact that we had a little bit of a down year in terms of the total dollars invested, that was not the case for Fintech. Fintech continues to grow. So over here, we're looking at dollars invested in 2015 in Fintech, and then deals. So we can see that year over year, we had a nice growth both in terms of the dollars and the number of deals. Deals jumped, almost doubled. So one thing I started to notice looking at these deals, just to give you guys some background on what we're seeing at LAVCA, We have a process where we survey investors and get all of the actual confidential data. But every day, we're like looking at a really big amount of information. People are sending us deals and that kind of stuff. So we publish a newsletter every 2 weeks that has all of the new deals, all of the new funds, all of that kind of stuff. And I started to notice that in fintech in particular, there were really interesting investor syndicates. So we started looking at which investors are getting together to fund these fintech startups. So this graph on this side looks at investor syndicates. So of all of the fintech deals that happened last year, how many of them had only local investors? That is to say, only Latin American-based VCs, and that was most of it. So that's that number right there. And then 10 of the deals, so about 1/4 of the deals had at least one local VC and at least one international VC. We're seeing a lot of that happen. We didn't break it out by sector, by stage here, but as you guys probably know in the market, generally you have local investors putting the first money in with the expertise and knowledge and connections and deal flow. And then theoretically, as those startups grow up, they should have access to more growth capital, which has historically been a problem, but we're seeing that change as well, in part because of the presence of international investors. So this is cool. This is something that we're going to be charting moving forward to say what's the strength of local investor relationships with each other, and what's the strength of local international investor syndicates. And then this is fun. This is just some of the highlight deals that happened recently if you look at fintech deals. And this will give you an example of some of those syndicates that I was talking about. So, Brazil, Nubank, Guia Bolso, Bank Fácil, Contabilize, and many more. Nubank's got most of the money. They've been in the press a lot. They've raised a ton of money. You have examples in Mexico. We'll go back in just a second and look at them. But one of the investors that is up there is QED, which is not a very well-known fund. It started off with the Capital One team. Actually, Bill came and gave a keynote at Finnosummit Mexico last year. Anyway, so they're fintech focused, they're Americans, it's a small group. They came in and invested in Nubank. And after they invested in Nubank, the way Bill tells the story, they got comfortable with the market and they invested in 2 more Brazilian fintech startups. And could we go back one slide? Great, thank you. And then once they got comfortable with Brazil, they jumped over to Mexico and invested in Confio. Confio was an interesting deal because it was QED's first time investing in Mexico and also Kazakh Ventures, which is one of the leading investors in the region, but hadn't done a deal in Mexico yet. In Colombia, we wanted to put up Busco here, which is that's the new name of the merger between Red Seguros and Asegúrate Fácil, and that had local investors, Axon and Velem. But here's kind of a graph of some of those deals, and you can see the way investors are coming together. In my final minute, I want to leave you guys with a thought that's been on my mind. People keep talking about emerging markets, obviously digital emerging markets. And I was reminded of the fact that these won't be emerging markets forever. We're at this very special moment in this tech revolution, and it's going to pass quickly. And then, in a certain amount of time, we'll be in the future where everybody's on mobile and there's all sorts of other crazy technology happening. So when I think about emerging markets, I remember that just 10 years ago in San Francisco, when Facebook was just getting started, there were people saying, this social media thing is it's gonna die out, it will be a bubble too. And now we look at the internet as this kind of digital technology as this more pervasive layer that's going into transportation and insurance and all these other real world verticals. So when we think about what is it going to take to get Latin America from an emerging market to just a global market, I think one of the big things is getting people online and getting them included in the financial, in the transacting systems and things like that. But even though it's very much considered, Latin America is considered an emerging market and certainly undercapitalized, it shocks me every time I look at data that shows that Latin America is already a dominant force globally in terms of digital populations. I was looking at some data last week that showed that in terms of time spent on social media, 3 of the top 5 countries globally are here in the region. Brazil's number 2 behind the Philippines, then it's Mexico, then it's Argentina, and then the United Arab Emirates. And this is with only about 60% of the region's population online. I get chills every time I think about the growth opportunity. So yeah, it's not gonna stay emerging forever, and we're gonna be tracking this. If you go to lavca.org/VC, you can sign up for the newsletter I mentioned as well. Follow along with us, share your news so we can share out to the rest of the community and get us all on the same page. Thank you.